Hello to everyone who may or may not be listening. We are going to chat about some disaster recovery strategies and user journeys for GitLab.com. And we should summarize this call later on in an issue as well. I've prepared a mural board. I don't know if any of you both has worked with that before.
No.
No.
So this is essentially just a drawing or sort of collaborating thing. You can put stickies on stuff, you can draw out flows. I often use this as sort of a first very high level, let's talk about these things in a more abstract way. And then when you have a better understanding, you can convert them into mermaid diagrams or whatever. It's more of a creative thing. It's quite nice.
Okay. Can I share what I would like to talk about?
Sure.
I think maybe first about the big picture, like what would we or can we expect from a failover and what is it about, right? Mm-hmm. And then maybe what technologies are available for those kind of things. Yeah. And then maybe looking what we could apply of that. That would be the things I would look into, because I think we need to start a little bit from the beginning for all of this.
Okay, I can do that. Can you see my cursor? Are you in here? You probably are,
yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay, you don't need to do stuff here as well. This is a way for me to also take notes, right? I will just make a section here.
Okay. Let me maybe start by talking about what I think about the requirements that we have set. And I think when the discussion started, even before the working group was founded, we set some RTO and RPO goals and some considerations about costs, right, and implications. And I think those considerations made some sense, and they were set in this issue in the handbook for disaster recovery.
But it's also the RTO and RPO goals are only defined for Premium Plus, correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think there was this consideration of how much would it cost and what of that can be achieved without, paying too much and things like that. But if we start at the very beginning and think about what is disaster recovery, I think the disaster recovery we are talking about here is about a region failing, right? Like everything being down, all of GitLab, and what to do about that then. And if you think about that, this is always a major event. So it's hopefully not very often that it happens. And if it happens, normally it's something which isn't caused by us, but caused by a cloud provider being down or some, a catastrophe or something like that.
Well, it could be caused by us, right? It's like if you log into, like GCP and accidentally delete all of our nodes, right? Like, even though that's unlikely, that's also potentially disastrous.
Right? That's true, yeah.
It doesn't matter, but it's a catastrophic event. It's something that happens and the entire platform is down or in such a state that we don't believe we can, recover it quickly without some drastic action, right?
Yeah, that's the point. How quickly can we recover, and when do we do the decision to fail over, right? If we have something to fail over, and the expectation of our customers. And I think we should try at first to be very, very, or to be not ambitious with what we can reach for our customers, because I think most customers, even paying customers, would understand if a, geolocation fails for whatever reason, that this is a major event and that it can take hours to repair, but it shouldn't happen very often, right? So for RTO and RPO targets, at least at the beginning, I would be very open for making it not too hard for us, because I think the more important message is always to say, we have something where we can guarantee you to recover within this, RTO and RPO target. And it is easier and to achieve this fast for us if we don't set a too high target for that, right? So if we say we are back within 10 hours, for instance, we can maybe reach this solution within a few months. So we would have something which we already can deliver as a promise, right? The lower we go with these targets, the harder it will be to accomplish this. So I think that's the first thing we should think about, like trying to be not too ambitious with what we promise to our customers, to be faster to deliver something at least, right?
No, I think my interpretation here though is that these are sort of ambitious RTO and RPO targets that we want to sell at some point, right? I would not write that down anywhere before we are very certain that we can really deliver on that, right? Because otherwise you're also legally liable and all sorts of other things, right?
Yeah.
So, but I think the journey to that point is likely the one that you describe, right? It's not going to be step one, perfect solution, 5 minutes, full failover, right? It will take a lot longer, but something is probably better than nothing, right? Yes. And I think at the moment we're at nothing, as in, best effort. We could probably pull something off, but nobody knows exactly what that means, right? It's sort of my understanding.
Yeah. And if you look at what can we achieve within a short amount of time, I think then if you look at technical solutions, then the main problem always is how can we get all the data, like the state, over to a second site, right? And how can we spin up infrastructure to be able to serve everything from another geolocation?
Yeah.
So that's the solution to that we are aiming for. And also, if you look at that, there are cost implications. Can we do this for everybody, or do we need to select somebody for that one? Yeah. And this again has implications of our application can support the selective thing, right? So it's not easy and hard to make decisions. And if we go with the decision that was taken for using Premium Plus customers, then we rightfully, like the discussion and the issue was, come to the conclusion, okay, then we leave everybody else out of that. And we need to live with the consequences at the beginning.
We can't. Yeah, we can't. I don't think we can do that at all. I think part of that discussion, and actually what I would like to explore, I sort of want to leave like any sort of customer banding out of this initial, not this discussion, but like our initial implementations, because it is additional work to me to like be selective. And I think where we actually need to be selective is in two areas, like the recovery point, like how close was the delta between like failing and the stuff that we have saved. I think that's something that we would want to effectively scale based on like as a feature of different customer plans. And then the second one being like who gets access first, so the recovery time. Because one of the challenges I brought up in the call this week was we're going to delay large customers' workflows, which usually have programmatic, like shared CI runners, other things that they're doing, hitting registry programmatically for various different things. So we should also probably sort of have a, not a wide grand opening of everybody can come in and get their stuff again, but like a scaled opening of like, okay, so you're this type of customer, you're going to get in slightly faster so that you can get back to your day-to-day, because it's going to be impactful of like, okay, we have to get caught up, and then start scaling in the other folks. But I think it needs to be everybody.
Yeah, well, I think that makes sense.
The knobs there are the RTO and RPO.
Yeah, but then we come to a very narrow path of possible solutions already because of costs. And I think the narrow thing that I can see, maybe I missed something because I'm an expert in all of the technologies that are there, but what we have is it's fairly easy. We have disk snapshots, multi-region disk snapshots. So that's the thing, how we can assure for all of our customers that we don't lose their data if we lose a region. So that's the thing where we need to restore from. Yeah.
I was very excited about this possibility, and I may have a bad understanding of this, but I wanted to ask you, and it's a slight digression. Is the following statement true? Is all of the Gitly data, the Git data, on local SSDs in GCP?
Good question. I'm not sure how this counts as local or not local SSDs, but as we are making disk snapshots of them, then I think it doesn't matter so much, because if you can do
because
disk snapshots,
I was a little bit scared because there is something called local SSDs in GCP that does not support disk snapshots. And I read that yesterday and I was just like, if we're using this, then this neat like solution that you like, or path forward, crumbled, and
yeah. So I think that everywhere we are using those attached PD SSD disk things. So there's an option to have local SSD disks to get even higher performance. That was discussed for databases, for instance, but I think we still have those network attached special things that Google is providing as a storage layer. And I think we do every 24 hours disk snapshots. I'm not sure if they are multi-region, but by default, disk snapshots and GCP are multi-region if you don't change that. So we have something like that. We should, of course, check all of that.
Yeah, that's fine. But that was my first fear. But if I just if I paraphrase what we said, because I think we may be closer to sort of complete agreement on some of those things, at least here. It's like, for me, not copying certain data from free users is not an option. I think we can't lose data, right? I think that's a no-go, right? We cannot also, in my opinion, create a system that makes it impossible to sort of open up to free users at a later point, right? So if we, for example, had a scenario where you fail over to a different region, right? You open it up for premium and free users, right? Free users don't have their Git data, but they have their database data. They start pushing stuff, and then a day later, you have your other side up again, right? And you all of a sudden you have a split brain situation. You can't really reconcile any of that. I think that's not something we can do, right? I think the only thing we can do is we can essentially say, for a select set of customers, we open up earlier because we have closer RTOs, right, and ability to restore this. And then we have something else that we don't know yet, right? And we can make GitLab available at a later point in time, right? Ideally hours later, right? Not weeks, right? And I think that path needs to be laid out and part of the initial implementation, because I don't think it is feasible for us to not have that. That would be that's my personal opinion, right? It's like 95% of our data and people using this are on free. I understand that we may not want to make hard guarantees for this, right? But we can't leave them behind. I don't think that's a business.
I think that's why we are taking disk snapshots, right? I mean, we try to protect data of our customers, all of our customers. We have that in place. And if they are already multi-region, then we already know the costs. And if we want to have a better RPO than 24 hours, then we need to calculate how expensive it would be to do that more often.
Yeah. Okay.
But the basics is at GCP, the way to have multi-region disaster recovery is to use cloud storage. That's the thing. We could also try to do something with object storage or something else, but cloud storage is the thing at GCP mainly for being safe in multi-region disasters, right? And with the snapshots, that would be one way which would work. For GitLab, I think it would work best this way.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I want to add one other thing for consideration is you mentioned split brain. I think we should also consider not failing back. If we have if we have something that moves us from US East 1 to maybe the West Coast or somewhere else in the United States for GitLab.com, we just stay there. And then the former primary site becomes the secondary site if it ever comes back.
Yeah, no, but I think that also means that a requirement is that we are able to eventually scale up the disaster recovery site to the same size as it was before, right?
Yeah.
And I think this is how, I think in my mind, the process looks like this at this point with those requirements, right? You have a catastrophic event. You need to determine that the best way forward here is to actually fail over to your recovery site, right? Let's say you are able to make that determination. Then you fail over to your secondary site, right? Mm-hmm. At that point, that site must be able to relatively quickly allow premium and premium plus customers to resume their operations, right? So we must have a way to recover, to have most of the data with relatively ambitious RPO target, right? And we must be able to let them in. Then, those folks need to be able to essentially continue working, right? Having lost ideally no data or very little data, right? Following this, we must have the ability to open up the platform, like gradually, ideally, for everybody else, right? That is not in sort of the first sign, which means we need to scale up the infrastructure, right? We need to like reattach that data, that we didn't have in the first wave. And then following a period of time, right, the secondary site is at the same scale as the primary, and you're not failing back at that point.
And that's not that hard to accomplish. I mean, it's still some work, of course, but scaling up via Terraform isn't hard. In most cases, everything is there. And restoring from disk snapshots can be automated. It takes a time because it's a lot of data, but it's in the range of 1 hour maybe for such a huge disk to be restored and attached to a new instance, I would say, a rough estimate.
Yeah, because I think for me,
totally feasible.
Yeah, so if we go down here, right, it's like, I can also share my screen if you like, but I made like this like little mini diagram here yesterday evening with like stateless services. Yeah, exactly this one here. Right?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to drag and drop that.
The visiting squid is approaching its prey.
Sorry.
So the way I saw this, and this is all very like, it's still high level, right? But I think it's maybe enough to talk about, right? It's like, and Henry, you can correct me here. It's like, we have sort of stateless services, API nodes, web, all of those things, right? And we have them in our cost estimate already, right? We don't need to replicate anything there, right? It's like they have no state, right? And we can scale them down as much as possible on a secondary site, right? So that's fine. If via Terraform, we're also able to scale them up, or it's in Kubernetes, right? And it does it automatically, right? That's cool, right? It still works, but we don't really have an issue here. Then we have database stuff, which is mainly our Postgres database, right? So that does need to be replicated, either to a secondary site with a reduced node number for sort of the first wave, or already we just say this is fine from a cost standpoint. We just mirror this, right? And there is a technology with Patroni, right, and standby clusters that allows you to do that. Right, but that's the thing that we need to do, and we need to figure out. Right, then there is object storage. Object storage, like all the data that we have in there, right? That is, I think, also already in cross region. So the object storage itself takes care of the replication. We don't really need to do anything there, right? What we do need to understand is what the RPO targets are for the object storage. I think it's 10 minutes guaranteed. As in, like across regions, there is some guarantee from GCP that they will re-replicate to this other region within an amount of time. I don't know what that is, but we can look that up, right? That's important to know, because if that's something that you can choose and pay more, right, then we need to consider what that is, or if the default is enough, we're also okay, right? So that's object storage. I think there's not much that needs to be done there. And then the more important thing is sort of all of the Gitly data right here between these two nodes, because this is where most of the cost is sits at the moment, I think, right? If you had live Gitly nodes on both ends, right, then the amount of money that costs apparently is troublesome, even though there's maybe a separate discussion to be had. It's like, if we could eat that cost for like 3 months and actually have a working disaster recovery solution, right, and then we work on making this better, is that maybe acceptable because we mitigate the risk of complete failure, right? So, but that's another discussion. Like, what I'm saying is, like, the cost of not doing something and saving the money every month, essentially, right, still exposes us to the risk of a disaster, right? That's a business calculation. In any case, so I think the only thing we really need to figure out, only thing at the moment, is how to split out this here at the moment. And I think, I think what you what you said is they're like, I can think here of, I'm getting out my stickies again here. I can think of 3 different ways of handling this, right? And correct me if I'm wrong. We just use everything disk snapshots, right? Which I think, I don't know what the fastest incremental snapshot time is. Maybe it's 10 minutes, right? Or something, I don't know.
You can't do more than every 10 minutes in GCP. Yeah. And even then I would need to see if we can do this, because we saw when we do snapshots that we slow down disk reads for a short moment. We saw this in our databases. So we need to see how the implications are for GitLab. I mean, we do this daily now without issues. But something like every hour a disk snapshot, and then see how much that would cost, of course. Yeah. That would be something that we could try to target for, right?
So the RPO here is kind of like 1 hour, right? So people would lose a maximum of 1 hour of data with that approach. Is that correct?
Yes. One complication, of course, is that we would string replicate the database, and the database would be, you know, within the minute to the point of when we switched over, while the data in GitLab would be back up to 1 hour from the point we failed over. So they would not be in sync anymore. So people would need to repush their things to get up to the state they were before. And so we would see problems when the database is pointing to MRs, which are not in the GitLab nodes, because we use this snapshot and things like that. So these are still complications we would see then.
Okay, but that's one way of doing this, right? It's like you just do it in that way. It's maybe the simplest solution, and it doesn't use anything else, right?
It's a very realistic solution cost-wise, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, then I think the other solution that I can think of, and now we're in product territory, right? Or actually, like there's maybe another step. We can say we split the data and say 3 repos via disk snapshot, right? This assumes we know where 3 stuff is, right? So we essentially say we have specific nodes, you know, that or disks that only host free data, and we have others that host premium plus data. I don't think that's true at the moment. I don't.
Yeah, but I did some calculation based on the fact that 95% of the repository storage space is used by free users. So 5% only of repository size is used by premium plus users. That means we could try to just migrate all the premium users to 3 dedicated GitLab nodes, or maybe 4 or 5, just to be safe, because they are causing more traffic, I think. And then we would have an easy infrastructure way split of, syncing things for premium customers, because that's these 4 or 3 nodes that we need to sync via geo or something.
Yep.
And so that would be a very simple and boring way to separate those.
Yeah, I actually agree with that. I think what we can do then is we should still snapshot these things, right, as backups, right? I think that's a sensible thing to do. But we can then, for example, say to geo, these things here need to be replicated as fast as possible, right? And geo is async, so it's not 100% in sync. But if you do this, you can probably, stay within. We would have to measure, right? But I would estimate within a minute.
Yeah, right? Let's not bring geo into this right now, because let's just say we need to sync those synchronously if we can, right? I mean, there are several technical options for that, and maybe geo is even the best one because it's already there and working. But there are also things like ZFS streaming replication and other ways, I think, to sync file systems. So I would keep it at this level for now, and later see if maybe geo is the right thing to fit in there.
You're really not a fan of geo, are you?
No, that's not true. I think we even will come to geo for this solution. I think, but I want to keep this open.
No, I think actually
at the beginning of the working group, we spend too much time to try to think how to use Geo for certain things instead of starting from the top with technologies that we can choose from, right? And
I actually
that's why I think stop right now, but come back to it later.
Okay, so but if we do this in this way here, then essentially we have two ways, like sort of two streams, and this is all, like, as you can see, it's bad drawing, right? But it helps me to do this later on. It's like we essentially have then two streams of data, right, into the secondary side. We have the free stream, right, which is a little bit longer, right, and we have some other mechanism that separates out our premium users, right, to be able to deliver this at a different RPO target, right, which may be more expensive because we can't use some of this technology, right, and we need to keep the SSDs running. But that's kind of how I see this here.
Yeah, what we essentially have then is a very small site which is already up and running for premium customers.
Yes, which I think is the main sort of the main benefit, right? It's like this here is the free thing, and this is the premium thing, right? Because we wouldn't have, and this is again something where my personal knowledge stops a little bit. We would have a live Gitly instance, right, that has these things available on the secondary site, right? And it essentially could use them immediately as soon as we fail over. Whereas the other thing probably means we need to stand up more Gitly servers and attach the disks, restore them, some kind of process that we need to go through in order to have those available. Is that right? So to come back to like what Brent said like earlier, in this scenario here, the ingress and egress cost is actually only for premium. Is that correct? In this scenario. Because the other thing is via disk snapshots that still, I think, has some cost for restoration. I don't know what that is, right? But you wouldn't have to do it on a continuous basis via.
Yeah. It's only when you restore it's cost.
Yeah, and the way we're snapshotting makes them available to any region in the US or US and Canada. Certain Canadian regions are in that bucket, but okay. We're snapshotting for US, meaning that they can be spun up at another region.
Yeah. So we in this scenario here, we do assume a certain capacity, right? Which is this only works if we are able to essentially lock out free users until a point in the future. That's also something we shouldn't forget, right? It's like, if you would make, like if you just stand up your secondary site, you repoint DNS, everybody's happy, but you let free users in, they wouldn't have their Git data. So there must be some kind of mechanism that allows us to say, we're operating, in a degraded state, right? Currently, we're still restoring free users, and those people can't actually log in or get any access to anything really, right? Because we need to still restore their Git data mainly. All of the other stuff would be there. The database is there.
Yeah, I wouldn't even say we need to restore for free users. I would just say we need to restore because else people would feel excluded, right? And that's actually true.
Yeah, I mean, fair, right? We can talk about how to do this. I mean, luckily, right? I think one, like we are shipping maintenance mode, right? And this would be like an interesting sort of additional feature for the future that we could build on top of that and essentially provide a mechanism to sort of regulate who can log in or can't. But I don't know. I would have to talk with the teams that handle this kind of stuff. Okay.
Yeah, because one of the dangers here is like, well, I mean, it's dangerous to the users, the free users, like they could just like push all their stuff and create new repos, and then they would have basically duplicate English today, duplicate repos going on. So yeah, maintenance mode or some mechanism to notify them that they're in a queue of some sort, whether or not we actually can tell them where they're at in the queue, but that we're still waiting on restore for their stuff, I think would be important.
We also need that time, not only because of the data, but also because you need to be able to scale up the infrastructure, right? Mm-hmm. It's like essentially like if we keep the site at a really minimal level, right? Even probably seeing more traffic from premium only, and I don't think we know exactly what that looks like at the moment, right? But you would have to like sort of increase the size initially already, right? For premium users to get something out, right? And then you probably have to scale it up even more to like start to get to like .com levels. I don't know how easy or like how continuous that process is, right? It's like if it makes a difference of saying like, let's grow by 25% or let's grow by 500%. I don't know like how that works.
So I think that's the shortest bit of work for like the stateless things like API
Yes.
and web nodes. I think the longest running thing here will be like restoring all the GitLab file nodes from snapshots.
Yeah, I agree.
And
okay.
I mean, because one of the things I would advise that we would do in this scenario is like we scale up beyond what we have for current.com, because we're going to anticipate additional traffic as people are concerned and just coming and hammering the site until they have their data ready.
Yes. Okay. So, but this to me looks like sort of a path forward here, right? That is pretty boring, but possible. There is one more that is hypothetical for the future that I just want to like talk about, because people have talked about this as the way forward in the past, right? Which is essentially you don't do any of this disk snapshotting, but GitLab manages all of this via object storage. Right. At that point, for like this is something I think that has been floating around in the like GitLab team for a while, right? Where they're not only for .com but also for customers, right? Maybe they would want to provide an option for folks to store Git data in object storage, so that like I think from a mechanism here, like GitLab would just load this from object storage, keep it in memory. I don't know how any of this works, right? But I think this is something that people have been talking about, and I've heard it like several times as this is how we're going to do it. I don't think this is necessarily the solution, but it may be something that could happen in the future, right? And that means we probably wouldn't have to separate anything anymore, because like object storage is relatively cheap. But I personally, this sounds to me like a rather significant amount of work that will not happen like in the next 2 months, right? So
yeah, also without knowing the details, but I would wonder about the performance implications of that, because I mean, if you run from SSDs and Git is very much tailored to work with file system, right? And I don't know how you would translate this over to object storage and how that would look like then.
Like, so, I am in no position to answer this, but I just want to point it out as this is a thing that may exist in the future. And at some point, people told me, like this is what's going to be built, but
yeah,
I don't know.
Would be great if it works.
Yeah, I'm speaking to.
I mean, sorry, I could see a world where like we do use object storage for ultimately like the keeping the state of the repos, but then we're doing some sort of behind the scenes streaming between the object storage and a local SSD for the file nodes themselves, so that they're highly performant. Yes. But so a whole other scenario of like, okay, we need to reduce like the time between what's on the local disk and that, but I think that would dramatically improve our RPO. Yes. Because of the fact that like we might be in milliseconds or even 0 for those types of things if we were storing it in object storage ultimately.
There's actually also like there is another discussion going on that I've acquired the backup and restore category a year ago, and have told people that unless we hire more folks, we can actually work on this, which is still true. But there is some very interesting, like I think, opportunity, for example, to build sort of an incremental backup solution for Git, right? Which ties in with some of those things, right? If you are able to, for example, like push all of the like actual changes that are made on a repository into object storage, right? And keep other state in memory or on SSD, right? You could have a system where you continuously like push these changes to repos into object storage incrementally, which I think would be really cool for lots of folks. It doesn't even need to be only object storage, but it's just also a way to provide easier ways to back up data for people that are not in GCP and don't have Git, have disk snapshots, for example. Yeah, but that's a side tangent. Future music.
Okay, now that we are at the possible solution, let's talk about the challenges that I still see here. One thing is I'm not very sure about how best to sync Redis, but I think there's an easy way to do that. And if it's just, you know, having another Redis instance on the other side or something, but that should be solvable.
So I have a note here. It is geo-specific, but I just want to know if you would stand up the secondary site as a geo secondary, we don't actually replicate Redis at all, because I think the caches and everything would need to be regenerated, right? But I don't think there is a need to really sync those things. You know, I think you would have performance issues probably, but we don't do that right now.
I think we have state in Redis. I think we would lose all sidekick jobs and things like that if we lose the state. So we need to carry this over.
Yeah, we have two Redis clusters. One that Fabian, you had mentioned, where you have a general cache, which we would likely just rebuild that. And then the other one is like, we actually have a bunch of queues, work queues, sidekick queues, as Henry mentioned, in another Redis cluster, where if we were to lose that, we would lose all these running jobs or queued up jobs. So, I mean, that...
Yeah. Okay,
but
I see that. That's true.
Anyway, and not fail over, yeah.
Yeah.
You would lose that probably as well, right? So you could maybe argue this is, like, it would be great, but maybe for first iteration, people
but that's
would be
the thing
okay
you need to think
queue.
about. Like
Yes.
You should note this as an open question for research. Then the other thing is still, how do we want to separate user groups? Like, do we use geo for that maybe, for selective syncing? Do we use this approach of migrating customers over to dedicated geo nodes or something like that? Then is the open question how to deal with this gap between
Sorry, 1 second. Before we move on, I need to write it down. How do we separate user groups?
Yeah, like how do we selectively sync, right? I mean, the two approaches that we mentioned are via geo, by enabling it to sync for premium customers only. And the other way would be to migrate premium customers over to dedicated GitLab nodes and then just sync them in any kind of means that we see fit and make sense. And maybe there are other approaches, I don't know. Then the other issue that we really need to look in is this gap between database state and GitLab storage state after we restart from snapshots, because there will be a gap. So how do we deal with that? What else? There was something else in my mind. Oh, I forgot about it. Maybe it comes back later. Yeah, the other thing is how do we test if the secondary site works? Because with this approach of only partially having customers being synchronously replicated over to the site, we can't really do a failover test, right? And so testing if that works is really a challenge in this way. And I mentioned already, I would love to see something like routing part of the traffic over to a DR site to see that it's working all the time. But that's, I think, hard because we need to do certain changes in our application to make this work. But for the far future, I would like to see something like this. But in general, it really is a question: how could we test a failover? And
so I have two ideas there. Yeah. Actually, I have a few more. So I think I really like the idea of routing traffic. This is actually something that Geo would like to do at some point for other reasons as well. Like, for example, we have this like read-only secondary web interface that is pretty not user-friendly, right? And so for things like this, actually a mechanism where you go to, like, you have a geo-aware load balancer, right? You go to the site that is closest to you. You're being presented with the web page. You make a change, right? It routes back to the primary web database and then comes back to your site. Doing that, loop is something I would really like to do. We don't know how. There's issues with this, right? Latency and race conditions and all that kind of stuff. But that's definitely something interesting. I think when we say we need to test this, I think we also need to distinguish what we are actually trying to test, right? It's like, are we trying to establish that users would be able to use the secondary site as is, right? That is, I think, what we accomplish by routing traffic, right? We also need to be able to test all of these other associated procedures, right? Like restoring snapshots from disk, right? And being able to like scale up the infrastructure and, you know, like turning this into a read-writable instance and repointing DNS, all of this other like stuff that we need to do on top of this actually like working, right? And I think that would require probably some sort of bubble test, right? Where you you essentially like isolate your disaster recovery site. So for the DR side, it looks as if your primary site is catastrophically unavailable, right? You do all of the things that you would do, right? In case of an actual disaster, but you don't tell users that this is happening and everybody is still working on the primary site, right? So there is no user impact, but you can run through the entire process and see, you know, if it actually does what you think it should, right? And that
a little bit
I think
like
gives
with
you
the staging geo promotions that we do.
Sorry?
A little bit like with the staging geo promotions that we did.
Yeah, that's exactly what this is. And what that tests is that your promotion flow and your entire disaster recovery flow is actually functioning, right? Which I think is also really important. I think there are a couple of other like more nitty-gritty issues here, right? The whole like Patroni standby thing, right? It's like Patroni runs on a non-omnibus version on production, right? So as far as I know, I think we.
Yeah, but you know, database syncing and failover, it's fairly standard procedures. So I mean, we can stand this up and let this run without big issues. I think. I mean, it's fairly well known how this works. So
I know that it's fairly well known how it works, but I think there's still intricacies to this, right? It does work though. Like we have it running in Geo now in alpha or beta. But I think it's still like work to set all of this up.
Yeah, that's true. But we know that this works. I mean, this is an often used scenario, and we know that this kind of technology works. And is used
well, and I think then the other thing, like at least work-wise, that I can come up with is just the automation, right? It's like associated with, you know, like all of the like processes here, right? It's like, because I think this is still, you know, even if we scale down everything, right, it's still going to be a bunch of servers. You don't want to do a lot of manual things, right? So there's at least work in setting all of this up, right? Which I think you are seeing already with some of the Geo stuff. And I'm not saying you need to use Geo. I'm just saying you will have to automate something.
I think it's not as bad as you think, because we will essentially need to mirror our production site to another region. And that means we just copy our Terraform more or less over to that site using different credentials maybe and things like that. But and then just scale down the node numbers, which is just changing a few numbers in one file if you do it manually. I mean, of course, there are some more details to that maybe, but the main thing really isn't that hard to accomplish for scaling the stateless infrastructure up and down. That's really not that hard to accomplish in my opinion. The most work would go into setting this up once, and then maybe writing automation of making the scaling up and down a little bit easier. But I think I don't have too big worries to get this accomplished.
Yeah, I think where I might have a bit more concern for work there. So yeah, I think there's a big spike of work in terms of like having this similar Terraform and what have you in maintaining the DR site and adjusting the size of it. But I would love to also have automation around like, okay, we need to fail over. So all the tasks that we would be normally manually doing, like, oh, DNS, we need to point it over here and we need to figure out which IPs. And so there's a lot of safety mechanisms where like removing a human from the equation in a stressful situation would be helpful to have automated. So the DNS is the only thing I can think of, but I know there's a handful of other things where we want to programmatically kick off things in a sequence. So I think there is a slew of automation here.
Yeah,
I
the
think
devil
so,
is in the details for sure. I mean, there are so many
Yes.
things that maybe don't work if we switch over to another region with different IPs for sending out mails, or I don't know what other dependent services. So a lot of details to think about, of course.
Well, and we would also need to automate like our updating our list of IPs that our traffic will come from for the different customers that need to change that within their own infrastructure. So there's a whole bunch of fun things. I mean, honestly, we should probably do a test once we're feeling ready with this with a couple of marquee customers that are willing to help us, like at least tabletop exercise, like, hey, what would you need to do if we did this? Oh, we would need to work with our IT departments to upgrade, update this this allow list of IPs for your new range, etc. So
Yes.
yeah, a lot of devil in the details type stuff, Henry. You're right.
Okay, but I think if I look at this, the main thing here, that like I think there are at least two things that are like things that we just can't do at the moment, right? Which is selecting the premium customers, the customer data for GitLab. I think that capability does not exist as far as I'm aware. Nor do we have a way to lock out free users and let premium users in. I don't think that's particularly hard necessarily, but those are at least two things that we in product I think can't do at the moment.
Yeah, what would need to be done is to enable the application to route premium customers to certain GitLab nodes that we specify. And the migration of already existing customers could be done by infrastructure. We have ways to do that, but the application would need to route all new repositories of premium customers to dedicated GitLab nodes. That needs to be built into the product somehow.
Okay. I don't know how that works. I just don't. But I think that's something that can be figured out at what level that makes the most sense. Okay, so that was kind of exactly what I was hoping for, to like get a little bit more into the details here.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I think one more problem that, and maybe I glanced over you mentioning this, but like, I do see an issue with like the database being out of sync with potentially with some of the snapshots there, because that's going to be, I think at worst case, it's a horrible user experience, but it might be really confusing. And one of the concerns I think we should have here is customer support, like, because we can't scale people. And so with a lot of additional, like, it says the MRs are here, but they're not, like, I know we can have templates and stuff for that, but I think we should figure out like a way to, I don't know, be able to, for like our data store to have knowledge of like what's actually there, and some system that can rectify and reconcile, I guess, the delta.
Yeah, I think this is probably the most difficult thing. Like I don't know much, but I know that the overall like compartmentalization of our data in the database is not very clear cut, I think. So
there might not be an easy answer here. It might just be like, yeah,
no.
it's going to look broken. So for
Yes.
certain people.
Yeah,
but I think it's
also be
also
very different
like,
for each of the GitLab nodes, because they might have snapshots which are older or newer. And so I think that's super hard to accomplish to get this right. And then sync, I think it will never work perfectly, even using a geo for syncing, because it's not fully synchronous, right? And so
no, like you will have
we...
some instances if you essentially as soon as you lose any kind of data, right? In one source but not the other, right? You will have some brokenness, right? I think that's.
Yeah. I think we need to count with the fact that we need to advise customers in these cases to repush their local repository data if they see issues. Because the good thing is normally all of the customers still have local copies because it's Git, right? The bad thing is I think we really can't prevent this without heavy technical measures, which are not feasible.
No, I think the only way to really do this is if you had a GitLab cluster setup that allows you to have consistency across regions, right? But I think that comes with performance penalties.
Prefect isn't supporting this, and the GitLab team was saying that Prefect isn't built for that, and the latencies would be too high because they try to be sync, but that means that latency would be too high to go cross regions, which I really think is one thing we should try to look into again, because it would be the perfect solution to this if we would have built this into Prefect. But as far as I know, the GitLab team is of the opinion that's not working.
Yeah, but like I think there are many other things that we could, put like future things. I think at the moment, like I like your approach, Henry, of saying, something is better than nothing, right? It's like if a hurricane destroys the data center for GitLab.com, and otherwise we would have like 3 weeks of downtime, and then we actually are up and running in, like a couple of hours, let's say, for everyone, and people have to repush their repositories because they lost one MR. I think that's better, right? And there's obviously a lot of future improvement.
Yeah, I don't think we'll solve for the issue that I called out. I think we just need to be prepared with like a maintenance mode or whatever to explain this to literally everybody that, hey, you're going to see some discrepancy here, and here's how you can solve for it. So
yes, absolutely. I completely agree.
One last point I still also want to mention is for infrastructure is that if GitLab.com fails in a region, then we need to make sure that infrastructure like Chef, the ops instance, and all the things that we need to manage GitLab.com and the disaster recovery side is also still working. I mean, we need to really make sure that we don't have a single point of failure in this infrastructure.
Because I think there was a discussion like many months ago about, for example, having a secondary site for ops. I don't think that's a thing at the moment, because people realize that if that instance goes down, you're unable to actually do what you would need to do elsewhere. I don't know how that is handled at the moment.
We have ops in a different zone or region, maybe. I think that was the thing that we have set up, but I need to look it up.
Yeah,
but I think we put it into a different AZ for sure, or maybe even a different region. I need to look into that.
Yeah. But okay, so I think because we are almost out of time for this, what I can do maybe even today is I'll take all of these notes and create an issue and say these are some of the scenarios and how we see this, and these are some of the potential solutions for this, right? These are some of the likely pain points and what we need to do, and then I think that's already a more concrete picture compared to before, right? And I think then we need, I think once, like if we actually like have some agreement on this, then we can look how to do that, right? And I don't think we can get around using some cloud service provider specific implementations like the disk snapshots, right? That's with the cost constraints, right? I don't think we will get around that, which is fine, right? And I think that's also, but it means there will be some specificity for how GitLab.com solves some of these problems versus maybe some of our self-hosted customers, right? But that's okay.
At a certain size, every customer will come to the same conclusion, I think, because of course. Yeah, I think a good thing would be to do the calculation for disk snapshots every hour, or maybe something like that for our Git nodes, so that we have an estimate of what the costs would be compared to needing to sync everything, right? And then
I mean, if we can, like, and this is like it's a tiny bit difficult for me because I don't know what data is available and what isn't. But like if we assumed, right, that the premium plus data is on SSD, we do actually have a cost estimate for that per month, right? I think it is something around 10,000 euros or dollars or something, right? So it's actually not that much, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, it's only 5% of the total amount of storage for premium customers, so we can.
Yeah, I think the storage cost is 200,000, right? So 10,000 actually sounds right. So with my mental math.
Yes.
So cool. Thank you.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, thank you. And I think this is a good tool to use for this.
It's, like, I don't know, like it's a little bit silly on some level because it mimics, what is the correct word, skeuomorphism, right? It looks as if it was a physical thing. But I, like in my previous jobs, which was not always working from home, I personally really enjoyed the sort of engineering sessions where you just have whiteboards and stickies and you start drawing these things out. And when you capture that and then you write it up, I personally find this quite fun, right? And it feels like a good thing to do when you have, something amorphous that you need to get into, because otherwise you spend 10 weeks in an issue. And
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, okay. I think what obviously interests me is I think it is probably a fair statement to say that most of these things can be accomplished without using Geo at all. Some of these things may work better with what we have already, and I would personally want to consider where we can come in, because we do have this experience, like like the promotion sequences for a secondary site, putting it into read-only mode, these things, which is I think a separate bit from all of the replication logic, right? And then I think that would be quite. I would really like that to be part of this, because I think that would be so much good feedback for how to do this at scale that would feed back into the product, even for folks who run a 50K reference architecture, because many of these problems are very similar, right? And I think that that would be quite exciting.
I also think for syncing the Git data, Geo would still be the right tool, maybe.
Yes,
Either
I think
just
actually
syncing,
it is.
Either just syncing three dedicated nodes or syncing by customer type. If we can build this into Geo, that would be a good solution, I think.
Yeah, I have actually a like an epic open for the team, and I meet with them next week about sort of an MVC to only sync data for specific customer types, right? So, and the initial thoughts from Mike and Douglas were that we would need to manage a specific sort of relationship in the code, but that is actually possible. And they were concerned about the complexity with, for example, all of these other data types, like job artifacts and whatnot, but that's even not required because that's all in object storage. So we really only talk about Git data, which is projects, design repositories, snippets, like a bunch of different types of stuff that you need to concern yourself with. But,
yeah, please try to also consider just syncing specific Gitly nodes, because if you can do that, so, I guess we will get to this anyway, because business maybe will come up with, okay, for this customer type, please use this type of node for performance and cost reasons. So
actually, this is a question that I have, because I don't know how this, like this is something I should know, but don't.
I mean, we have something in our database which is saying for each customer on which sharded the repository is located, right? So
yes, because Geo can do that already.
From.
We can select data only by storage shard.
Ah, cool.
So if that was a thing, then we kind of have that ability already. So maybe, like I've never really understood how storage shards work in GitLab, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, I think it's just mainly a path dedicated to a node, but I'm not sure about that. Yeah.
Yeah, but in any case, I think what we want to do from a Geo team is if we can, if we can come to a conclusion on like the path that we want to take, then we can start thinking about what we can do in product to support you. And I think we would also be excited in helping you with setting some of these things up, like looking at the automation. We have like quite a few plans. Like my biggest plan for Geo overall, like is to make the promotion sequence more automatic and easier, right? And I think there are some interesting ways of potentially doing this that are, let's say, more generic, right? It's like you could handle that with Chef or with Consul or whatever, but the difficulty there is how to like manage the state of all of the individual GitLab RB files. So cool. That's all I had. We're already a little bit over time. Anything else from both of you?
Oh, thanks for walking through this.
Yeah, it was great. I think we have a better path forward now.
Yeah, okay, I think I have not many meetings today, so I'll commit to writing all of this up today, and I will put it into an issue and share it with the working group. And then I think Scarbeck is also pretty interested in this, and then like I'll just ping folks on it and say like, look, what about something like this? And then maybe we can get that discussion going, because like this is my impression is it's probably easier for everybody to give a more accurate assessment of how much something is going to cost once we know a little bit more concretely what we're trying to do, right? And so cool. Then have a great rest of your Friday. Thanks for the time. I enjoyed it, and talk soon.
Yeah, same to you.